Hi Year 5, it's Mrs Gibbons. So we're on to Chapter 9 of Whale Boy by Nicola Davies. It was hot, really hot. There wasn't the slightest breeze to cool the skin or make even a baby finger crease on the surface of the sea. The Louisa May floated like a toy sitting on a glass table. For the first time in over a week, Michael hadn't seen a dolphin all day. He was 2 miles offshore now, motoring along his daily survey course. The Louisa May pulled the reflection of the sky and the island into pleats behind her, and the put-put of her engine was lost in the big, quiet stillness of the afternoon. Michael shut off the outboard and stopped. He leaned over the side to scoop up a bucket of seawater to cool himself and looked down. Long fingers of sunlight slanted into the clear water, shifting slightly in arcs of radiating lines, and was swallowed up at last into the perfect blueness of the depths. Water deep enough to lose the highest mountain. Not that deep just here, Michael thought, but perhaps 2,000 feet. Not enough to lose Mont Pierre, the highest mountain on the island, but deep enough to be beyond the reach of sunlight and warmth. This was where sperm whales had once lived, down there in utter darkness. The only light would have come in odd spots and dots from faintly glowing sea creatures. It was a world no human could visit or know. What would it be like down there, Michael wondered. He poured the water over himself, savouring the delicious coolness. Fwah! The sound came from close behind him and made him spin round so fast he lost his balance and fell into the bottom of the boat. Shorter and louder, even closer. Michael picked himself up and looked over the gunwale. A black shape, much, much bigger than the biggest dolphin, showed about 5 metres from the boat. It was like a polished rock. On its rounded side was a slit like a flattened S, bigger than a man's 2 clenched fists, with a raised lip around it. As Michael watched, astonished, not understanding what he was seeing, the lips pinched together, the hole closed, and the black shape sank rapidly beneath the sluicing water. Now his brain had time to catch up with his racing heart. A whale! Its dark head and blowhole, that's what he had seen. Fwah! Now it had surfaced on the other side of the boat. This second surfacing was hardly less shocking than the first, although Michael just managed to stay on his feet and cross the boat this time. The whale was a little further away now, but more of its body was thrust above the surface. 2, perhaps 3 metres of a giant black oblong, smooth and rounded, stuck up out of the water. The blowhole was at the top, much lower, only visible above the waterline for a moment. It was an eye. The rest of the body was a confused shadow under the surface, which had been ruffled by the whale's movement. It was hard to judge how big the creature was, but Michael thought its head must have been bigger than his whole boat. A sound was coming from it. The whale was beaming at him, a fast ticking like a vast, overwound clock, but so powerful that Michael felt the clicks entering his body like a stream of bullets. He'd heard dolphins doing something like this. His father had said it was how they found their way around, deep down where there was no light. They made sounds and listened to the echoes to get a kind of picture. The whale kept doing its clicking while it swam around the boat. Michael felt pinned to the spot, unable to do anything but cling to the side of his boat and follow the whale with all of his attention. The surface bent and buckled like molten glass, but he could see the whole of the submerged body as it swam on its side around the boat. It was enormous. 2 or 3 times the length of the Louisa May, and the strangest shape, quite unlike a dolphin. This creature seemed to be almost half head. And what a head! Square from the side, with the skinny little jaw, speckled white, slung underneath like a hinge. Head and body together were like a fat torpedo that tapered towards the huge tail, which beat up and down, slow, but full of grace and power. Below the big expanse of head and above the paddle-shaped flipper was the eye. It sat in a moulded crease like a sort of naked eyebrow, which gave the whale an inquiring look. The white of the eye was clearly visible, with the dark iris sitting at the centre. Its gaze, like its clicks, was intense and full of energy as it looked right at him. The clicks stopped abruptly, and the whale began to swim around the boat the other way, showing Michael its other side. A mirror image, apart from 4 white parallel lines, stars perhaps, that marked the right side of its head. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned its head downward. The triangular tail rose up like a strange sea tree, breaking the surface of the water into 1,000 reflecting fragments, then sliced downwards. Its beating left a backwash, a perfect circle of smooth water. Michael breathed in and out carefully, still holding the boat so tightly his fingers hurt. He struggled shakily to the tiller and put the engine into gear to move over the exact spot where the whale had gone down. He stared over the side in wonder. Somewhere below his keel, the whale was swimming down and down into the dark of the deep. The water slapped blue against the underside of the boat, and the engine puttered. The only other sound was the blood pumping in his ears. It was louder than the bursting valve on a pressure cooker, and even more of a shock than before, as Michael had been sure the creature had dived. But it had only gone down far enough to be invisible to him in the glint of the sun. It had bobbed up the moment his back was turned at the stern of his boat. Once again, Michael could see the neat white lines scored along its head. It swam around the Louisa May, only just under a thin film of water, so Michael could clearly see the eye looking up at him, its expression searching and clever. He couldn't help feeling that the whale was laughing at him. Once again it turned, upended, and showed its splendid tail. It left behind another circle in the water as it submerged. Michael waited, looking over one side of the boat and then the other, but this time the whale reappeared more than 100 meters away. It looked like a log lying on the surface, its back very straight and dark. For a moment he couldn't decide which end of the whale was its head. Then there was a puff of breath from its blowhole, a grey mist against the blue of the sea, and he had it. There was the squarish front of its head, and there the knobbly dorsal fin. It was heading almost directly northeast. Without another thought, Michael began to follow. For an hour or more he kept directly behind the whale as it moved along at the surface. He watched the sea sluicing over the top of the head. It looked like a big water tank. From behind it was clear that the blowhole was not in the middle of the creature's head, but off to the left, in the extreme left-hand corner of the big tank. The only other part of its body that was visible was its back, between the dorsal fin, not so much a fin as a hump, and the tail flukes. This was a dark, knobbly line that reminded him of the mountains along the top of the island, or a picture he had seen of a crocodile's tail. In the bright, slanting light, it was impossible to see down into the water, and after a while, Michael found himself longing to see the whole of the whale once more, not just the small sections of it that showed dark and shiny, and a little confusing, above the surface. When it had approached the boat before, the engine had been quiet. Perhaps if he stayed where he was, it would come close again. He shut off the outboard and waited, perfectly still on the glassy sea. Up ahead, the whale had vanished. Michael scanned the ocean all around, shading his eyes with his hand and looking intently at the smooth sea around the Louisa May, which sat light as a floating leaf. Nothing. No sign of a head or fluke or fin. Not even a skittering pack of flying fish, or a lone tropic bird, or the pebble-like head of a surfacing turtle. Michael didn't hear or see what happened next. He felt it. A light scraping along the underside of the boat. It was the gentlest of touches that disguised an incredible strength, like being stroked by a giant's palm. Michael froze. The whale was right underneath the boat, holding the Louisa May on top of its flipper. He was completely in its power. It could lift the boat out of the water or tip her over and smash her to bits. And yet he wasn't afraid. The whale was just holding itself under the boat, as if trying something out to see what it felt like. Carefully, Michael leaned over to look. On the starboard side of the boat lay the whale's tapering tailstock and the flukes. On the port side, the head, with its scarred lines, lay like a piece of huge dark wreckage. This close, Michael could see that big sections of skin had peeled off in straight lines, giving the whale's head a patchwork look in greys and blacks. And closest of all to the boat, only just submerged, was the whale's eye. Michael looked right into it, and the whale looked back. It was so very, very close. He leaned out further and further, stretching his hand slowly towards it. The whale didn't draw away. He reached down until his fingertips touched the crease of skin that gave the whale a kind of eyebrow. It was cool and smooth, like a carved stone covered in a finely stretched coat of rubber. And as his fingertips touched the whale, he looked into its eye. It was impossible to say what colour it was, dark but with rays of brightness. It was like a window into a whole galaxy, with stars and planets, comets and supernovae moving inside. Effortlessly, as if movement and thought were the same thing, the whale submerged out of reach of Michael's hand. There was a last shushing sigh as the flipper caressed the boat one more time, and then they were separate again. Michael watched as the whale sank directly below him. Against the background of featureless blue that gave no clue to distance, the whale seemed to be shrinking. At last it hung suspended in the water, looking no longer than Michael's forearm, the grey cylinder of its head and body, then the tapering tailstock, and finally the lovely triangular tail. The whale turned its head away from the surface, and the tail beat with a slow, sad rhythm, propelling the creature down and down, until finally it was lost in the blue deep. The setting sun made a path over the sea, bathing Michael in golden light. He felt as if he were lit up inside too. He had touched a whale and looked into its eye. Like a sleeper waking from a dream, he looked around, dazed. He was much further north than he'd expected. The jagged outline of Cape Paradis, the most northerly point of the island, was within sight. He took some bearings and fixed his position with the compass. He lined up the top of Mont Pierre and then the rocks of Cape Paradis. Where the two lines crossed, that was where the whale had dived. Michael wrote in the logbook date, time, position. But where the word sperm whale should have been, he left a blank. The medallion with its silver whale rested cool on his skin, reminding him that, for now at least, the whale should remain his secret. Okay, year 5, I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 10. Bye.